last left our heroes, it was 1937, and they had just survived, most of them, the Chinatown death class peril. And we're now picking up 6 years later. It's 1943, World War II, and whereas the heroes of the first book were Walter Gibson and Lester Dent, and the background characters were Robert Heinlein and L. Ron Hubbard. Heinlein and Hubbard are now front and center and joined by 19-year-old Isaac Asimov, and they've been hired. This is all based on true fact. They've been hired by the Navy to work on secret weapon research in Philadelphia at the Naval Research Station. So they're joined there by some other science fiction writers too, and through the course of the book we're going to try to solve the mystery of Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower, which he built in the 1900s, early 1900s on Long Island, at Shoreham, Long Island. The ruins of it are still there to this day. There's a theory that says that it was a communication tower, but there are other people who say that the first time they turned it on, it blew up Siberia in the Tunguska blast. So that's the kind of secret weapon that the Kamikaze Group, led by Robert Heinlein and everybody else down at the Naval Research Center, is investigating. They've gone to New York to follow some clues to try to get their hands on an ancient Tesla case that may help them determine whether or not the thing has worked. In the course of this, they stumbled into a cavern under the Empire State Building where the real Minetta Stream, which used to feed into the Croton Reservoir, still emerges to this day, and it actually bubbles up down at 25th Avenue. So it runs underground from the Empire State Building to 25th Avenue. These guys have found themselves locked in there, and the only way to get out from under the Empire State Building is to walk the length of the stream to 5th Avenue underground, several blocks underground. Any questions? Okay. Isaac couldn't get the word hypothermia. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Well, I know you guys can. Nor its pervasive, irritating, accompanying facts out of his head. He couldn't see his hand in the dim light provided by Gibson's torch, way too far ahead for his comfort. But he didn't need to know that he had the shivers. Stage 1, he muttered, when the body temperature drops from its normal 98.6 to anywhere between 98 and 95. Sorry, give me just a couple seconds to see the words properly. The blood vessels in his extremities were contracting, sending vital heat back into his organs. He touched his thumb and his forefinger together several times. The sensation was reassuring, both because he hadn't yet gotten numb enough to no longer feel it, but also because the inability to complete the action would be a sign that he was heading into stage 2. The water swirled and gurgled just below his belt, pushing incessantly at his back. What was thigh-high for Heinlein meant the tip of Isaac's necktie was getting wet. The ceiling above continued to gently curve overhead. No one spoke, everyone continuing to concentrate on taking just another step in the right direction. I should say that in this group right now is Walter Gibson, who created The Shadow, Robert Heinlein, L. Sprague de Camp, who was an American fantasy writer, Isaac Asimov, and L. Ron Hubbard. Did you say something? Sprague asked, his voice sounding thin and strained. When a sailor's ship is sunk and he goes into the drink, it's not the sharks that he's got to worry about, Isaac said. It's not the salt water or starvation or heat exposure either. What he's really helpless against, and what will kill him faster than anything, is the hypothermia. 70 degrees or below, it's my Philadelphia project. A way to beat hypothermia, the red-haired man behind him asked, a voice in the darkness. Isaac knew of L. Ron Hubbard, mostly through the man's cowboy pulse he had read in his father's candy store. But he also knew that Hubbard had moved early and forcefully into the sci-fi pulse, had seen his name in Astounding as early as 38 or 39. Isaac and his friends had always maligned his appearances as those of a hack without a feel for real science. Isaac replied. His teeth had just started chattering. Another bad sign. I'm trying to figure out a way to get sailors out of the water quicker. Rescue. A man in the water, wearing all blue except for a little orange life vest, is going to be almost impossible for a plane to spot, let alone a ship on the sea. but if he had something highly visible and spread out around him and covered a couple square yards, that would make it easier to spot him. A fluorescent gel or dye that doesn't dissipate in water. That way he can be rescued before stage 2 sets in. There was a loud splash from up ahead as Sprague stumbled in the water, dropping his end of the Tesla case. Buoyant, Isaac could see it low in the water, bobbing gently. Sprague emerged from the water, sputtering and disoriented. He sluiced the water from his face and hair. Loss of muscular coordination, Isaac said, as Sprague regained his footing and grip on the box. Not funny, Bob snapped. Irritability, too, Isaac muttered as the men ahead of him began to move forward again. And I wasn't trying to be funny. Hey, Ron clapped him reassuringly on the shoulder, but also used the motion to push him forward at the same time. What happens in stage 3? Death, Isaac replied. So, no stage 4 then. Good to know. They began following the stream again. Isaac could feel a gentle slope to the bed, almost imperceptible, but just enough to make each footfall less sure than the one before it. Soon the tiled ceiling gave way to rough natural stone carved by years of the water's endless Stygian flow. This was where the excavators, the New Yorkers known as groundhogs, had stopped work. At the same time, the floor began to grow uneven and slippery. A force field generator, something on a belt, would be useful now. It would create a bubble of protection around him, pushing the waters back, keeping his head safe. But, he thought, if it pushed water away, surely it would keep oxygen out, and his carbon dioxide in, he would suffocate, which would be like drowning. He heard himself whimper. Hey, Ike, Sprague said in a bright conversational tone that wouldn't have been out of place over a cup of coffee. Stop calling me that, Isaac said, forgetting for a moment about drowning, which might have been Sprague's intent. I've been meaning to ask you, what was that thing Hugo Gernsback was asking you about? What thing? Foo-fooism. Tell me about it. The water was now over Isaac's belt. He could no longer ignore the fact that the stream was growing deeper. Foo-fooism, it's a religion that my friends Johnny Michael and Donald Wollheim started, a religion for fans of science fiction. Hubbard grunted behind him, interested. Isaac didn't care if the writer was making fun of him or not really. It was a joke, he explained, sort of. Do tell. A note of interest appeared to poke through Ron's submissive veil of jaded indifference. How far had they gone since Sprague had slipped? Half a block? Hugo Gernsback realized from the amount of mail he was receiving after starting Amazing Magazine that there were thousands of science fiction fans out there, so he started the Science Fiction League, a correspondence club for those of us who wanted to prove that science fiction was literature and knew that it could be important. Was that a rap? Keep walking, Bob said. Keep talking. Lots of fans joined up. I did. It was just so uniting. I mean, you think you're the only person in the world who likes this stuff, and then you find out there are others out there who like it too. And Hugo Gernsback published the names and addresses of members in the league so we could write each other. People in different towns could find each other, like Freddie Pohl found me in Brooklyn. Pohl, Sprague asked, the writer? Yeah. For a moment, Isaac forgot what he was talking about. His mind was beginning to race in wild directions, and he recognized a sudden burst of mental energy as symptomatic of stage 2. He began speaking rapidly, as if the jaw and lip and tongue action could provide warmth to the rest of his body. But mostly it was a nervous reaction to the realization that he was going to drown down here, and Gertrude would never know. So, Freddie's group was spread out through Brooklyn and Queens. It wasn't really his group. It was Wally Sikora and Donald Wollheim and Johnny Michael, and they called their club the Futurians. Now, Michael had a belief, an idea that science fiction could really ultimately become a political movement, almost that the people who most wanted to imagine the future could bring about the future. He was totally serious about it. He even presented a speech once called Mutate or Die, in which he called for direct political involvement from fans. But, you know, most fans just like what they like, and otherwise they're pretty different from one another. So Wollheim suggested that maybe why Michaelism was receiving such a poor reception was because fandom actually had more in common with a religion than a political movement. It's really getting deep, isn't it? His feet had momentarily left the bottom, and he had half floated for several yards. Go on about the religion thing, Ron sounded out of breath. Foo-fooism, they called it. Foo-foo was a giant beetle that lived on the side of a mountain on a planet called Vulcan and controlled Wollheim through mental manipulation, using him to spread the gospel. For all intents and purposes, Wollheim was to be considered Foo-foo himself on Earth. Wollheim, Sikora, and Michael even created something like a Bible, and went so far as to write up tenets of belief and name saints in other cities from the Science Fiction League rosters. It was all a huge joke, of course, but at the same time, Wollheim was angry at Hugo Gernsback because he hadn't been paid for a story he'd written for Amazing, and he began accusing Hugo of not letting the membership have a more active hand in the management of the club, So Hugo Gernsback publicly revoked his membership, actually put a notice in the magazine about it. It was all silly and meant nothing up until that point, but that was like a shot fired at us. We didn't want to be in a club without Wollheim, and we were outraged for him, so we left and started our own club. And we wrote all the other clubs because we had their addresses, and we got them to leave the league too. And without all that dues money pouring in, Hugo was put out of the science fiction club business in a matter of months. And there were all these new clubs all over the place. And then Campbell took over Astounding and Unknown, and we had more reading choices, better reading choices, and a whole different market to sell to. And then Hugo Gernsback was out of the science fiction business altogether. But it wasn't really because of proofalism, even though he says it is, and he's taking that out on me. It was because Wollheim was my friend. I helped kill the science fiction league, but I'm not foolish. He was